All right, I bought a little pen thing. So today I'm going to make videos and try to use this pen. My penmanship is awful. I can't draw. This is the best I can make what makes a 10 out of 10 look like. So today I'm going to be talking about the concept of what makes a 10 out of 10. Now this is really easy for me. It's always been easy for me to gauge my own opinion on what makes a 10 out of 10. But I think a lot of people, when they say 10 out of 10, all they really mean is the game is good. And I don't think that's the appropriate way to rate something 10 out of 10. So let's take the 10 out of 10 concept to the simplest point. We're going to talk about my boy, MJ. No, that's not Mary Jane. That's Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan is a 10 out of 10 basketball player. Michael Jordan is a 10 out of 10 basketball player because when you compare Michael Jordan to other basketball players of his time, he's better than all of them. So he's 10 out of 10. Best basketball player. Now, if you take video games and you apply that same kind of logic, let's take, let's just look at, let's start with Final Fantasy 16. Final Fantasy 16. Is Final Fantasy 16 a 10 out of 10? Well, let's compare it to other games. Final Fantasy 16 is a Devil May Cry clone with a Final Fantasy skin over the top. Does Final Fantasy 16 combat improve upon the combat of Devil May Cry? Does Final Fantasy 16's combat elevate action, hack and slash combat across the board in a way that warrants a 10 out of 10 on the combat alone? Probably not. It probably doesn't. Now, is Final Fantasy 16's story as impactful, new, and fresh as Nier Automata's? No, it probably isn't. All right. Is Final Fantasy 16's graphics way above something like Horizon Forbidden West? No, the graphics are good, don't get me wrong, but they aren't an elevation in the way that would warrant anything like a 10 out of 10. Now, all of these don't have to be 10 out of 10 aspects. You can have one game that has one aspect that's so good, it makes it a 10 out of 10. One of those games, for example, that is a 10 out of 10 is Slay the Spire. The simplest game ever, and Slay the Spire is a pure banger 10 out of 10 because the entire game of Slay the Spire is running through this little tiny dungeon with your deck of cards, and they built it perfectly. It elevated the roguelike deck builder genre to such a degree that Slay the Spire is still the king. I've played other games. There's an Obelisk game that I played, and it just doesn't have the right flow. It doesn't have the right feel. Slay the Spire is a perfect deck building roguelike. So every other deck building roguelike is going to have to be compared to Slay the Spire. And in order for a new deck building roguelike to be a 10 out of 10, it has to match or beat Slay the Spire. Now, eventually, Slay the Spire is going to go out of fashion, and you're not going to really be able to compare it to modern days. A perfect example of a game that you can't really compare to modern games is Final Fantasy VII. This game, at release, was a 10 out of 10. No arguments, 10 out of 10. I keep missing that 10. This pad is really hard to use. No arguments, Final Fantasy is a 10 out of 10. But one of the reasons that Final Fantasy was a 10 out of 10, very small reason, but one of the reasons is it elevated graphics. It was the first JRPG of a mainline series to hit the PlayStation 1, and graphically, it was spectacular. But because it was one of the first video games on the PlayStation 1, those graphics did not age. So you can't really compare Final Fantasy VII to something like, let's say, Dragon Quest 11 or whatever I think of 9 or 8. Oh, Dragon Quest 8 was great too. But Dragon Quest 11's graphics are likely going to hold up forever. Actually, let's go backwards. CT for Chrono Trigger. You can't compare Final Fantasy VII's graphics to Chrono Trigger because Chrono Trigger was done at the peak of sprite-based graphics. So the Chrono Trigger graphics still look good because they're sprite-based. They weren't any new tech of ugly polygons. So one could easily argue that Final Fantasy, if it was released today, Final Fantasy VII would not get a 10 out of 10. If Final Fantasy VII was released today, I don't know what score it would get, but it wouldn't get a 10 out of 10 because the game is just too ugly. It sucks that that's a fact, but that's a fact. So games also have a timeliness to them. There are some games that are timeless, 10 out of 10. For example, let's do Castlevania Symphony of the Night. This is still a 10 out of 10 today. It is one of the founders of the Metroidvania. It's the Vania part of the Metroidvania theme. And this is still a 10 out of 10 because the sprite graphics still hold up. Everything about the game held up. This game elevated that genre to such a degree that it's still the king today. Now you have other games like Hollow Knight, which is a 9 out of 10, not a 10 out of 10, because Castlevania Symphony of the Night is better. Bloodstained came out, which was made by the same people who made Castlevania Symphony of the Night. And the new modern art style doesn't look as good. Combat doesn't flow as good, so it's a 9 out of 10. It is not better than Symphony of the Night. Symphony of the Night is the Michael Jordan of the Metroidvania genre. So when a Metroidvania comes out, you are comparing it to Symphony of Night until something dethrones Symphony of the Night. Now, go to another genre that I like to play. We have Final Fantasy Tactics. In terms of tactical combat, this is the GOAT. It's still a 10 out of 10. Everything about Final Fantasy Tactics still is the best in slot. It's still the best. Triangle Strategy came out, didn't dethrone Final Fantasy Tactics. Fire Emblem Three Houses came out, didn't dethrone Final Fantasy Tactics. It's still the best in the genre. Can't beat it, won't beat it. I hope they can beat it, but for some reason, they just can't make good strategy role-playing games to surpass Final Fantasy Tactics. Now, we have a game called Elder Scrolls Oblivion, which elevated things, and that's... Is it Oblivion? No, it's Skyrim. So Skyrim, 10 out of 10. I've never played the game. I don't like the game, but it is a 10 out of 10. It took that genre, and it elevated it. Now, a lot of open-world games that came out after Skyrim did not elevate the genre, but a game came out that did, and that is Zelda Breath of the Wild. That game is a 10 out of 10. It did, dyslexia kicking in. It did a lot to elevate the open world genre. Allowed you to climb everywhere. Gave you access to so many tools to do all kinds of crazy shit. Now, another game came out called Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. It's also a 10 out of 10. It has everything that Breath of the Wild had, which made it a 10 out of 10. But then they added that God Hand mechanic to allow you to customly build things, and that elevated it even more. There's nothing like that in the market. The Tears of the Kingdom building mechanics are so spectacular that right there is going to open up a whole nother genre of games. If other gaming companies can figure out how to do what Nintendo did, which they probably will eventually. And then you're going to see games pop up that are like, imagine Fortnite, where you have that base building, but instead of base building, it's just like free building death machines, and you go out into this world and you're fighting against other people that are building death machines using the God Hand mechanic that's in Breath of the Wild. That kind of thing is an elevation of the genre. So when you see people doing reviews that are giving games 10 out of 10s very liberally, what they're trying to say is, I like this game. And when they say, I like this game, and then they give it a 10 out of 10, I think that this is disingenuous, and video game review sites need to get away from doing it. Now, there's a movie reviewer who does a good job of doing his movie reviews. He doesn't really give things a 10 out of 10, and he's probably one of the best movie reviewers on the internet. His name is Jeremy Johns, and he just says, is it worth watching in theaters? Do you need to be drunk to watch it? And he avoids this 10 out of 10 nonsense. And for the most part, I think avoiding the 10 out of 10 nonsense is probably a good idea. However, if you're trying to be an objective connoisseur of video games, an objective reviewer, an objective consumer, and you're trying to apply objective measurements on what a game's score is, then some of these things have to be taken into consideration. You can't give Overwatch 2 a 10 out of 10 because it didn't elevate Overwatch. It didn't do anything that Overwatch didn't do. And there's so many games out there that get glowing reviews, but they don't really do anything spectacular. And it's just a little, I wouldn't even say frustrating. It's just a lot of people think 10 out of 10s are all over the place, and every game is a 10 out of 10. Every game is great, but it's just not the case. It is not. Some games are far superior than others, and some games are going to live in infamy, and other games are going to just whiffed out. Like Dark Souls, 10 out of 10. It changed the game for so many genres. This game changed so much about the gaming industry, making it a 10 out of 10. Now, there's been a lot of Dark Souls clones, a lot of Souls-likes. None of them beat Dark Souls, the original. So Dark Souls 2, when Dark Souls 2 came out, DS2, did Dark Souls 2 do anything to elevate the Dark Souls formula, to elevate the Dark Souls genre? No, it didn't. So Dark Souls 2 does not equal 10 out of 10. Oops, hit the undo button on my pen. Dark Souls 2, not a 10 out of 10. Now, Dark Souls 3 is a more complicated topic. DS3, is Dark Souls 3 a 10 out of 10? Did it do anything to elevate the core mechanic of Dark Souls 1? Kind of, but not really. What Dark Souls 3 did was perfect everything that was Dark Souls. So because it perfected a 10 out of 10, I believe that Dark Souls 3 is a 10 out of 10. It just took Dark Souls and took everything that was good about Dark Souls, and it tried to elevate it and make those a little bit better. Nothing like brand spanking new, but that makes that a 10 out of 10. And then obviously Elden Ring, ER for Elden Ring, 10 out of 10. It took that Dark Souls formula and it put it in open world. That open world, I don't know if it elevated the Dark Souls formula, but it modified it. It changed it enough to where this is a 10 out of 10. You get a lot of the good experiences Dark Souls, then you get some open world crap too. And I like the open world exploration. A lot of people don't like open world because a big part of open world is kind of using your imagination and exploring and looking through nooks and crannies. And when you're playing Elden Ring, there's a lot of secrets in there. In fact, the first time I played through, I missed so much crap. The second playthrough was probably an extra 20% of gameplay that I didn't even see because I was just missing so much as I went through the game. So Elden Ring, 10 out of 10. Obviously, Nier Automata, 10 out of 10, just for the way that story was told, and the combat was passable. It's not great combat, but it's passable to deliver that story. Now, there's concepts of negative things in a game that can destroy it. I was talking about Final Fantasy VII, and why Final Fantasy VII probably isn't a 10 out of 10 now, and that is the garbage graphics. Final Fantasy VII was just made at the wrong time for good graphics. Technical masterpiece for when they made it, but today, not so much. And there's been plenty of other games that have been probably great games that are just not 10 out of 10s for me because there's an element that is just missing. So let's talk about Diablo 3. Now, this game didn't really elevate the action role-playing genre nearly as much as Diablo 2 did, or even as much as Path of Exile did. So for me, despite the fact I got like 2,000 to 3,000 hours in Diablo 3, and I do love the game, it's only a 9. Diablo 3 is not a 10. Now, right now, Diablo 4, I'm going to hold off reviews because I don't view Diablo 4 as being it's not launched yet. Diablo 4 launched, but it really doesn't launch until there's seasons. Diablo 4 doesn't start until the seasons start. But Diablo 4 built a good platform, but I don't think Diablo 4 elevates the platform. So D4, for me, 9 out of 10. Doesn't elevate it. Diablo 4 doesn't do anything overly spectacular to say this has elevated and changed the game for action role-playing games. That might change with the seasons. Diablo 4 is probably going to have like a 5-year lifespan, and I have high hopes for it. I think it's going to be great. Street Fighter 6. Let's talk about Street Fighter 6. Street Fighter 6. So SF6. I haven't played the game. I've only looked at it. But in terms of just the graphics, so let's say that all the Street Fighter core mechanics, because Street Fighter 2 is a 10 out of 10 for a fighting game, right? Street Fighter 2 was groundbreaking when it came out. There was nothing like it. There was nothing better than it. So for now, Street Fighter 6 has some competition. It's got Tekken. It's got Mortal Kombat. I think Street Fighter 6 likely is a 10 out of 10, and it probably provides a unique experience that's unique to just Street Fighter 6. And the graphic upgrade of Street Fighter 6 compared to previous Street Fighters is mind-blowing. Street Fighter 6 looks very good. And graphics are a tiny portion of a game, but when you're looking at a game like Street Fighter, it can make a pretty good proportion of the game. The way it looks, the way it plays, and the way it feels are obviously more important, but looks are important too. So Street Fighter 6 probably is a 10 out of 10. You compare it to other fighting games out there, it's probably damn near the top. Let's talk about some looter shooters. Destiny 2. Destiny 2. Is Destiny 2 a 10 out of 10? It provides a unique experience. I mean, Warframe is out there. It also provides a similar experience. They're both a little bit different. But I'd say Destiny 2 possibly gets a little bit of a downgrade because of the monetization. Apparently, it's a monetization hellhole. I haven't really played Destiny 2 since it first launched. And when I first played it, it had that abysmal campaign. But I really liked Destiny 2. And I probably would have gave the multiplayer component of Destiny 2 a 9 out of 10. Partly because it didn't really expand upon what Destiny 1 did. Now, Destiny 1 is clearly a 10 out of 10. I don't know how to spell Destiny, apparently. 10 out of 10 for Destiny 1. It changed the game. It elevated the genre. It did a lot of things. It's kind of one of the godfathers of the looter shooter genre. So I guess that's all that I wanted to talk about. Some of the core things that make a 10 out of 10. You definitely have to be able to compare it to other games. And if it hits the market and there's just no other games like it, and it's a good game, there's nothing dragging the game down, it automatically puts it in the 10 out of the 10 category. Let's talk about some games that are a 10 out of 10 in the category simply because there's just nothing like it. There was I think it's called Vampire Survivor that came out. Yeah, I think it's Vampire Survivor. That's a 10 out of 10. There's nothing like Vampire Survivor when it launched. It created its own thing. It was excellent. People were addicted. It didn't hurt that it was like $3. That's a 10 out of 10. Obviously, we got Slay the Spire, roguelike card games. That's a 10 out of 10. That's an easy 10 out of 10. There's a game that came out a while back that was mind-blowingly good and unique, and I'm not going to be able to spell it. Katamari Damacy. You play this little alien fuck, and you roll a little ball around, and you grab things, and you make a big ball, and there was no game like it. 10 out of 10. Simply for that reason alone. It was excellent. It was fun. It executed on everything it needed to execute on for that type of game. Let's see. Some 10 out of 10 bangers. There's a game called Lost Odyssey on Xbox 360. 10 out of 10. The way it did its storytelling was unique. It told a bunch of micro stories that were all pretty powerful. And the way it did it elevated the genre. And not a lot of games copied the way it elevated the genre, but it did elevate the genre spectacularly. And when you compare it to other games of its time and in its genre, they just don't compete. So let's take a look at the Persona series. The perfect example of escalating 10 out of 10s. Let's start with most people probably didn't play the early ones. So let's just start with Persona 3. 10 out of 10. Elevated the RPG, dating sim, whatever the hell you want to call what Persona is. It elevated it to an extreme degree. Then this little bad boy dropped Persona 4. 10 out of 10. It elevated everything that Persona 3 did, plus some, and then it ingrained a fantastic murder mystery story into a role-playing game. I played a little bit of like Professor Layton. This was like my first foray into a murder mystery in a role-playing game. Excellent. It was fantastic. And it had no elements that took away from the quality of that game. And then we got Persona 5. Also 10 out of 10. This elevated Persona 4. It increased the usability of the graphic menus. The soundtrack was banger, and the story was fantastic. A little bit of a dead spot with the curly-haired chick. Game gets a little boring around the 75 to 90 hour mark, but it picks up after that. Those are all bangers. All 10 out of 10s. So let's take a look at some series that didn't do that. So let's start with, let's just go through Final Fantasy. I'll start with Final Fantasy 6, 10 out of 10. Elevated everything, incredible. Final Fantasy 7 did the same thing, 10 out of 10. Then we go to Final Fantasy 8. It is not a 10 out of 10. I don't know what you want to call Final Fantasy 8, but it's not a 10 out of 10. It didn't do what Final Fantasy 7 did compared to Final Fantasy 6. It didn't elevate the game. It didn't do anything special that was magical. It just was a bit of a dud, not a 10 out of 10. And then we go to Final Fantasy 9. This one is difficult because Final Fantasy 9 did everything right. It was a pretty interesting story. It was a damn good game. You had 4 party members instead of 3, which is great. You had good gear. And then they had a chocobo treasure hunt. That's where you went over the whole world, and it would show you a little picture. Up here, it would say, picture, find this in the world map. And then you had to run around the world map on your chocobo and find that little picture. And it was excellent. But did it really do anything to elevate the RPG genre? Or was it very similar to Dragon Quest newest? I think it's 10. The newest Dragon Quest. Did it just perfect the genre? And if it perfected the genre without really elevating it or changing it in any way, does it deserve the 10 out of 10? Tag, that's kind of up to you. I would say yes in both instances, but it could easily be argued. Sometimes the game is a 10 out of 10 and it just really can't be argued. Some people might not understand the game, but that doesn't change it. If you're being objective, hopefully, oh, look at that. I ran out of undos. Well, let's see if I can go to a file new here. Nah, I think I'm mostly done with this video. This pin is pretty interesting to use. Now, there's a game I'm playing called Etrian Odyssey. I'm playing Etrian Odyssey 3. And Etrian Odyssey 3 didn't elevate the game from Etrian Odyssey 1, which didn't elevate the game from Etrian Odyssey 2, and then 1. So I'd say Etrian Odyssey 1 for a dungeon crawling RPG is a 9 out of 10, and every subsequent entry just gets a little bit lower because they're not doing anything to elevate the game. So if you're going to have a game series that continually releases the exact same game over and over and over, your comparables, the games you're comparing those to, get larger and larger and larger. So, for instance, Far Cry. I can't remember which Far Cry. I think it was Far Cry 3 that kind of built the formula. So, Far Cry 3, you're probably looking at a 10 out of 10. I haven't really played a lot of Far Cry. I don't like the formula. But Far Cry did a lot to make itself stand out. Did a lot to make a great game. But every subsequent release did less and less to improve upon it. So, for Far Cry 6 to be a 10 out of 10... it has to be as impactful and as good as Far Cry 3 when Far Cry 3 was released. And it's not. So the Far Cry series is a series that's getting worse and worse and worse. every single release, despite the fact that Far Cry 5 is probably better than Far Cry 3. If you were to pick one game to play out of Far Cry, you'd pick Far Cry 5 or Far Cry 3. But Far Cry 3, when it was released, compared to the other games that were in that genre, was an overall better game, despite the fact that Far Cry 5 is better than Far Cry 3. May seem confusing, but that's how you want to look at it. Like Michael Jordan, 10 out of 10 back in his time, but if you can somehow clone Michael Jordan and put him back in the NBA, he might not be as goaty. He might not be the best basketball player. Probably still is, but you can go farther back. I don't know any super old basketball players, but if you took the best basketball player from the 1920s or whenever basketball first started, he would be a 10 out of 10 for the 1920s. But if you cloned his ass and you put him in here today, he would not be a 10 out of 10 for today's basketball market. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to talk about in terms of games. So there's a game coming out called PoE 2, Path of Exile 2, and it's going to have to do a lot to get that 10 out of 10 to elevate and be that much better than Path of Exile 1. Now, Path of Exile 1's biggest problems, I think, are going to be solved in Path of Exile 2, and that's the game engine. Path of Exile 1's game engine is kind of jank. It's kind of shit. You get more mobs on the map than the client side can handle, and it's just going to lock up. It's gonna crash the system. I've crashed Path of Exile servers a couple times. Usually I just get a client side crash, but I think I've crashed the actual server side being janky as hell every now and then. I think they fixed that. But back in the day, I was pretty sure I've crashed it a couple times doing Delirium 100 maps. But Path of Exile 2 has got a lot of pressure on it to get that 10 out of 10 status. It's going to have to elevate that series a bit. I should have gotten a list of games that have gotten 10 out of 10s, and then I can objectively either agree with or dispute the 10 out of 10. Now, the 100 system, the out of 100 works a lot better, because in order to give a game 100, 100 is different than 10 out of 10, unless you go through the 9.5 system, like 9.5 out of 10. Then that's obviously the exact same scale as 100. But if you're just doing whole numbers, which is what I'm doing on this, anything that's like a 9.5 is basically a 10. And so I'm just kind of rounding up to 10. And so let's take a look. I'm going to try to think of a game that came out that wasn't very... Let's talk about the very first Final Fantasy. I'm going to squiggle this out. I can't erase it. I'm out of undos. So, Final Fantasy 1 FF Original on the NES. This game was a 10 out of 10. There was a ton wrong with this game. But when this game came out, there really wasn't a lot of competition. There wasn't hardly anything to be able to say Final Fantasy is not a 10 out of 10 because this role-playing game is better. Now, there's a game called Phantasy Star that was also a 10 out of 10. It was similar to Final Fantasy, but different. Phantasy Star gave you a fixed party members. Final Fantasy 1 let you pick your job types. So they're both different enough, and they both elevated the genres in different ways to give them both 10 out of 10 statuses. Now, if the game was in a crowded market with plenty of role-playing games, neither of those would have been a 10 out of 10 because they are riddled with all kinds of different little minor problems. But those minor problems don't matter if a game doesn't exist that alleviates those minor problems. For instance, Skyrim, right? Skyrim did a lot of... Is it a Y or an I? I think it's an I. I'll do an IY because I've never played it. So I played it for a little bit. I didn't like it. So Skyrim did a lot to elevate the genre. But after Breath of the Wild, the open world genre has changed. So if Skyrim 6 comes out, or Elder Scrolls 6 comes out, and you're limited by invisible walls or mountains you can't climb, areas that are locked off to the player, it is not going to be a 10 out of 10. Breath of the Wild has changed the open world genre to the point where everything is explorable. Elden Ring had that, not exactly the same degree as Breath of the Wild, because Elden Ring didn't give you a climb button. So you can't literally climb anywhere you want. But in Elden Ring, if you see a spot off in the distance, odds are you can go to that spot off in the distance. So that is now a mandatory requirement for an open world game. So when Elder Scrolls 6 comes out, if Elder Scrolls 6 is just a minor improvement on Skyrim, it's not going to be 10 out of 10 material. They're not going to be able to do it. What's another? I feel that The Witcher 3, W3, is a 10 out of 10. I can't stand the combat. Goddamn dyslexia. I can't stand the combat of Witcher 3. I can't get through it. I can't play it. But The Witcher 3 elevated the genre of, I guess you would call that an open world adventure game, in a couple of ways that I've been told. One of them is the side quests. I hear the side quests in Witcher 3 are incredible. Each one has a nice little unique story. There's multiple like branching paths in it. So that alone puts it a 10 out of 10. That and the story. But if Witcher 4 comes out, and that combat that's in The Witcher 3 hasn't been improved, the side questing hasn't been improved, and the only thing they really improve is the graphics, you're looking at a 9 out of 10. In order for The Witcher 4 to be at a 10 out of 10, their combat is going to have to improve significantly. It's going to have to improve, hopefully, to Dark Souls level or to Elden Ring, Sekiro level, or they can improve it in just a different way all on its own, being spectacular, because I feel, or they need to elevate it in some other way. There needs to be something that makes it different than Witcher 3. For instance, one of the bad parts of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is the combat. The combat is identical. There's an M there. The combat in Tears of the Kingdom is identical to Breath of the Wild. That was lazy. They did nothing to improve that combat. They're like, this combat works. And if the God Hand, or whatever that stupid mechanic is that lets you build your little cars, let's draw a little car here. Yoink. Yoink. You got your little car here with your little spokies, and you got your little fucking pointy hat Zelda here. That's Zelda cruising her little car. If that wasn't so good, Tears of the Kingdom would have been like an 8 out of 10. If they copied all of the mechanics that you had in Breath of the Wild, and they just made Tears of the Kingdom with the underground area and the sky area, and that's all they added, you're looking at an 8 out of 10. Despite it being a great game, the fact that it wasn't that much above Breath of the Wild, and there's other games out there, it would have dropped it to an 8 out of 10. But the fact that its building mechanics were so addictive and fun and unique, it popped it to a 10 out of 10, because there's nothing like it. There's nothing like it. What are you going to compare Zelda Tears of the Kingdom to? Oh, that's right, nothing. There's no game that's going to compare to Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Now, just because a game can't compare to any other game does not give it a 10 out of 10. There was this piece of shit game called Night Trap. Actually, I think it was Night with a... I think it was Night, N-I-G-H-T, Night Trap for the Sega CD. Sega CD. This was a dog shit game, and it used real video, which was groundbreaking for the time. This game was fucking awful. There was nothing to compare it to. There's still probably nothing to compare it to. It was just a pervy game, and it not a 10 out of 10. So just because you're doing something that nobody else is doing doesn't make you a 10 out of 10. The most important part for a 10 out of 10 is how you feel when you're done playing it. Now, you can play a game that doesn't elevate the genre, that doesn't do anything spectacular, but when you're done playing it, you just had the time of your fucking life. Now, you can do that as a 10 out of 10 for your own personal opinion, but from an objective standpoint, you're going to be difficult to get that 10 out of 10 unless everyone who plays that game seems to have kind of the same opinion as you, that the game just felt good. It just blew it out of the park. I'm trying to think of a game that might do that. All right, so probably Forza. Forza 5, I think, was the new one. That's that racing Microsoft game. It really didn't do too much to elevate the genre in terms of like the mechanics of the car. From my limited experience with it, the graphics were excellent, but apparently when you play Forza 5, it just feels good to play. And because it just feels so good to play, and when you're in it, it's just bliss. It's probably a 10 out of 10. That's probably a 10 out of 10 game right there, just because of the feel of it. Now, there might be another game in this genre. There's a game series called Civilization. And there hasn't been too much improvements from like Civ 4 to Civ 6. But I could see the argument for Civ 4, 5, and 6 all being 10s, simply because this is the king of the genre, and there's not that many other games that dethrone Civ. And if you want this kind of gameplay, you're probably going to have a good time with all three of those. That might be a bit of a stretch, but it's probably true. There's a game that I don't personally like called XCOM, but there's no arguments that XCOM is a 10 out of 10. XCOM changed the game. It had its own unique formula. It kind of set its own little weird standard. There's now like XCOM clones, and it's just they take everything that XCOM did and then they just replace some of the assets, and they use a lot of the same mechanics. So XCOM 10 out of 10. All those clones, however, not 10 out of 10. Clones, not 10 out of 10. You're not going to get a 10 out of 10 status by being a clone of another game unless that game is dog shit. Now imagine if FromSoft released their little game called King's Field, which is what Demon Souls was kind of supposed to be, I believe. King's Field. Terrible game. And let's say that Capcom decided they wanted to take the Kingsfield formula, clone it, but actually make it good, playable, and feel nice. And then Capcom releases a game called Demon Souls. Capcom is going to get a 10 out of 10 despite the fact they're cloning a different game genre just because they improved it so much. Now let's talk about what makes like a 10 out of 10 remake. I don't play a lot of remakes. I'm going to clear my board for this one. Oh my god, this is going to be so hard to do with the pen. File, new, don't save. Oh my god, flashbanged. Flashbang. Okay, I'm going to need my mouse. Ow. My eyeballs. Let's paint that black. Let's put this color to white. And let's select brushes. Move that mouse over. Are we good? We are good again. I think the black and the white looks pretty nice. So oh man, I forgot what I was talking about. I should probably learn how to edit videos so I can just do tiny clips instead of an hour-long video and expect me not to fuck up after an hour. But I think that's part of my charm and the fact I don't want to learn how to edit videos. All right, let's take a look at... Oh man, I already forgot the game. Getting a new thing. I forgot the game I was going to talk about. Lame. I'm trying to remember it. That's kind of... Hopefully I can get good with it. It's kind of fun using this little pen. Alright, I'm going to pause this video and do some thinking. Alright, I remember what I was going to talk about. Let's talk about what it would take for a remake. Let's cover some remakes. Oops. Pin, hit the button. I'm going to do remix because, you know, it's shorter than remake. Let's talk about a clear 10 out of 10 remake. Resident Evil 2. Clear 10 out of 10 remake. This remake was so good that it did everything that Resident Evil 2 original did, but better. There was nothing that Resident Evil 2 on the PlayStation 1 did that Resident Evil 2 on PC or whatever console you had remake did that was worse. It was better in every single way. It elevated that game completely. Now, if you're looking at a game remix, you can, oh no, the black is gone. If you were gonna remake a game, it's a very risky proposition. Oh my gosh. I am just so good at MS Paint. Select the brush. It's a risky proposition. You have to nail it like Resident Evil 2 did. Let's talk about, oh my, now it's a black color. This is a practice episode here, boys. And we could say the practice is going bad with my new pad here. So Resident Evil, if Resident Evil 2 equals 10 out of 10 because it elevated the entire thing, what does Final Fantasy VII R get? Well, Final Fantasy VII R, for me, gets a 3 out of 10. Now, that is a harsh 3 out of 10. So why does Final Fantasy R get a 3 out of 10? Well, let's talk about it. In Final Fantasy VII, you have a bunch of really nice moments that happen in the game. And one of my favorite moments is you're in the, like, I'm going to call it the slums. You're in Shinra, but I'm not going to spell slimmer. You're in these slums. They're dreary. They're ugly. It's downtrodden. There's fucking whores everywhere. You got Don Cornelio. And then you leave at one point these slums and you go into the open world. And when you go into this open world, the whole game just opens up to you. It expands and you see this beautiful world. Final Fantasy VII R, I'm going to call it T for Tard. Final Fantasy VII Tard ruined that moment. That moment when you leave Midgar, when you leave Midgar and then you get to the open world, they killed it because that's where the first game ends. So that is one area which the Final Fantasy VII Tard edition ruined the experience, and it made a worse off experience. Another area that Final Fantasy Tard edition ruined the experience was with the pacing. You're in Midgar for no more than 10 hours unless you're really pushing it. You're going to get out of there between 6 and, we'll go 6 and 12. You're going to get out of there between 6 and 12 hours. And this Final Fantasy Tard edition added in a ton of padding to try to get 20 hours out of the game. And that padding ruins the pacing. So in this game, the most notorious padding scene is obviously like the side quest pump scene where you have to try to work the pump with Tifa and Aerith. And that's dog shit. But there's other ones where there's these beams that you got to walk across. And instead of just walking across it normally, you know, zoop, like that, they make you slowly walk across it. You have no odds of falling. You can't fall. There's no fail state. There's no reason to walk so slowly across this beam aside from padding out the game length. So that is a de-evolution. That is a negative quality that wasn't in the original that is in the remake. And there's so many of these negative qualities. Let's look at Final Fantasy VII Tard Edition. Are any of the side quests any good? Oh, well, there's a side quest where you got to go look for kids, and then later on you have to do the exact same fucking side quests looking for these little kids. That is a negative quality. It's not as good as the first Final Fantasy VII. First Final Fantasy VII, you didn't have to look for kids ever. Wasn't engaging. It wasn't fun. It didn't elevate the scene. Now, was there parts of Final Fantasy VII Tard Edition that elevated the scene? Yeah, I think the Don Corleone, the Don scene, was elevated by Final Fantasy Tard Edition. Maybe the rooftop section where you're jumping across the rooftops with Aerith. That might have been elevated a little. A little bit more of the story touches were a little bit elevated. But I wouldn't take those elevations above the feeling that you get when you leave Midgar and you get into the open world. So because of all of that, because the original game was a 10 out of 10, and the remake of that original game took some of the best elements and qualities of the original and just threw them away, one of those being the story. They're not even going to do the same story. Not a remake. Now, if you want to reformulate what this is called, so instead of calling it Final Fantasy VII R for remake, if you want to change that to Final Fantasy VII Spirits Within, because that's kind of what it is. If you just made a new Final Fantasy VII entry and it's a retelling, which is what it is, and if you want to view it that way, sure, you can give it a 7 out of 10. You can give it a 7 out of 10. But fuck that game. You're not giving that a good score because that game's fucking dog shit. Game is trash. Now let's do some steel manning of Final Fantasy VII Remake. Before that, let's compare Final Fantasy VII Remake to Resident Evil 2 Remake. The Final Fantasy VII R Remake versus the Resident Evil 2 Remake. Resident Evil 2 Remake is an obvious 10 out of 10. All the original fans are going to love it. The OGs are going to love it. And the new fans are going to love it. This game is just excellent across the board. Now, for Final Fantasy R, you might get a subset of the OGs that like it. You might get a subset of the new fans that like it. But that subset is going to be significantly worse because because Resident Evil 2 Remake did everything right. It literally just did everything right. Where Final Fantasy VII R didn't do everything right. For instance, Sephiroth, right? You meet Cloud. He's at this little fucking train station. He's over here all tweaking out. And then that's your first entry to Cloud. You don't know why he's tweaking out. You don't know anything about it. And you don't know anything about Sephiroth. Sephiroth isn't even really mentioned. But they fucking ham-fist Sephiroth all through the story. And then they give him these stupid little ghost things. And then Zack dying is a critical part of the story, and they're looking like they're going to be reversing that to where Zack is alive, and they're doing alternate realities and shit. I am not for it. I am not for it. And then let's talk about the combat. Is Final Fantasy R's combat better than Final Fantasy 16? No. Final Fantasy 16's action-based combat is better than Final Fantasy 7. Final Fantasy 7's half role-playing, half action combat is kind of the worst of both worlds. If you're not going to go party-based combat, then you gotta really elevate your action combat. And it seems like Final Fantasy 16 did that very well. Final Fantasy 15, not so much. That combat's pretty bland and pretty boring. It's mostly just mashing one button. It looks like Final Fantasy 16, there's a lot more than just mashing one button. Now, whether you need to mash more than one button, that's a different question. I think Final Fantasy 16 is so easy that you can get away with just button mashing. Final Fantasy Remake ruined the story, and I don't think they're going to be able to properly execute one of the best things about Final Fantasy VII. One of the best things about Final Fantasy VII is the fact that Cloud in the game is an unreliable narrator. He is telling you a story that he believes to be true because he got traumatized, he got Mako poisoning, and he was ashamed of himself to the point where he lied to his family and everyone else that he was first class. When in reality, he was not first class. He was just a grunt. But he was a grunt underneath a first class soldier called Zack. And Zack was the GOAT, and Zack was a badass. And Cloud was telling everyone Zack's stories, and he was pretending to be Zack. So normally you can keep up with that kind of a lie, but Cloud fell into a bunch of Mako, and then Zack died, and then gave him his sword. So in Cloud's mind, I believe he legitimately thought he was Cloud, because he lied so much that the lie became the truth. And one of the best scenes in the game is when you lose Cloud as a party member, and he's in the Mako stream, and Cloud essentially has a therapy session with Tifa. Now, some people call it Tifa, but you know what? I'm American. That's Tifa. It's not no music lesson with do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. No, this ain't no Tifa. This is Tifa. So Cloud basically has a therapy session with Tifa, and Tifa goes into his mind while they're in the jet stream, and you get to unveil all of the unreliable narration that Cloud has been giving you, and it is excellent. And after you play Final Fantasy VII R, do you believe this Cloud stream moment is going to be accurately told in a way that is as good as the first one? I have 0% faith that will happen. They're going to fuck that up so bad. They're going to fuck up all the key moments of that game. And they might not even show it. They might do something completely stupid because the guy in charge of that Final Fantasy VII remake is a clown. He is a shit show. He is not a good storyteller, and he is not a good writer. I mostly want to continue writing here, but I don't have anything else to talk about. I need to get good with this because I do like the idea that I can make these videos where I just rant about stuff and I don't have to put anything on in the background, and I can just use this to draw. I just wish I had some ability and some talent, but you know, not everyone has abilities and talent. Let me think of a weird game. Okay. There's a game called Plants vs. Zombies. This game is a banger. 10 out of 10. This game is so fucking good. It did everything right for the genre. It was a mobile game. It also released on desktop. This game, 10 out of 10. Absolutely incredible. And then a little ditty called Plants vs. Zombies. Let's redo that Z. Let's see if I can make a correct Z. Plants vs. Zombies 2 releases. And 2 introduces a paywall, you know, a lovely paywall, and nothing else improved upon Plants vs. Zombies. So Plants vs. Zombies 1 is literally better and superior than Plants vs. Zombies 2, because everything they added into Plants vs. Zombies 2 did the opposite of what it should have. It declined the quality of the game. Every single thing they added that was different from Plants vs. Zombies 1 made the game worse. So Plants vs. Zombies 2, that's a 0 out of 10. Plants vs. Zombies 2, 0 out of 10, because you can just play Plants vs. Zombies 1. The only reason people play Plants vs. Zombies 2 is because Plants vs. Zombies 1 was such a good game that they want to replay that game, so they play Plants vs. Zombies 2. Obviously, I'm being a little bit harsh there, but if you're going to make a second game to something like Plants vs. Zombies and it's not as good, then, you know, you're fucking up big time. Let's talk about some Left 4 Dead. Left 4 Dead. Left 4 Dead, 10 out of 10. Amazing game. This game is absolutely incredible. The first Left 4 Dead was such a good time. Now, Left 4 Dead 2 comes out. Let's hit the back button on my pen. Left 4 Dead 2 comes out, and it is also an incredible game. You got White Suit Nick, you got Coach, you know, you got all these classic characters. They had the hard rain level where the rain comes down, and then you're operating in some dirt. And then at launch, Left 4 Dead 2, probably not a 10 out of 10. It did not elevate Left 4 Dead quite enough to go 10 out of 10. If I were to rate it, I'd get 9 out of 10. Excellent game. Did a lot. The new hunters, I don't know what you would call them, the opposing forces, the Charger, the Spitter, there was another one. Charger, Spitter, I forgot the third one. I think they might have kept the other one. They added a little bit to it. The maps were great, but it felt kind of more like a map pack. But what Left 4 Dead 2 did was they added everything from Left 4 Dead 1. All the maps from Left 4 Dead 1, they added and they just put into Left 4 Dead 2. So now, Left 4 Dead 2 is more an extension of Left 4 Dead 1. So Left 4 Dead 2, 10 out of 10 now. 10 out of 10. Now they can do the same thing for Plants vs. Zombies 2. Plants vs. Zombies 2, if they just added Plants vs. Zombies into Plants vs. Zombies 2, then that's back to a 10 out of 10 because you're getting the 10 out of 10 experience from Left 4 Dead on top of the new experience. Another thing that makes Left 4 Dead a 10 out of 10 is it's just open for mods. There's another game that came out. I already forgot the name of it. Everyone forgot the name of it. And it was by the Left 4 Dead, the Turtle, I think it's Turtle Beach. It was by the Left 4 Dead people. And it wasn't Left 4 Dead 2. It wasn't as good as Left 4 Dead 2. It wasn't it, Chief. It wasn't it. He wasn't him. He wasn't him. And that game is gone, essentially. Like, no one's playing it. It's relegated to nothing because this set such a standard for the whole genre of like zombie shooter co-op playing that you have to beat this standard. And if you don't compare to that standard, unfortunately, you can't be a 10 out of 10. Now, there's another game that has set a standard that is so high that any other game, it just, they have to, I don't know what they would have to do. Well, this is really difficult to use with those buttons right on the side that you can hit. MK8. Let's try that again. It's hard to go big. MK8. Mario Kart 8. Mario Kart 8, 10 out of 10. They're still releasing map packs for this. I don't know what a game would have to do, what a kart racing game would have to do to beat Mario Kart 8. I don't know what a kart racing game would have to be in order for someone to honestly give it a 10 out of 10. For a kart game to come out and for them to point to that kart game and say it is on par with Mario Kart 8. I can't imagine the quality of that kart game. The look, the feel, the everything that is great about Mario Kart 8. The 4-player racing couch co-op experience that you get from Mario Kart 8 is unreplicated by any other game. And I can't imagine what it would take for a gaming company to release a kart racer to surpass Mario Kart 8. I just don't think it will ever happen. Until maybe Mario Kart 9. Now, if we look at all the Mario Kart games, not all Mario Kart games are bangers. 64, obviously banger, right? Mario Kart 64, 10 out of 10. The S in ES Mario Kart, 10 out of 10. Banger. But you got Double Dash, right? You got Mario Kart Double Dash. That's not a banger. That's a 9 out of 10. They introduced a little co-op thing, but who wants to play on the back of someone's cart? Nah, that ain't it, Chief. That ain't it. And then you had the DS Mario Karts. I think Mario Kart 7 was on the DS, and that's a 10 out of 10. That's banger because it's handheld. And handheld can elevate a game genre, a game series. Let's say Diablo 2, for instance. Diablo 2 remake, D2R remake on the Switch. I was hesitant. I didn't think it was going to be a good gaming experience to play Diablo 2 remake on the Switch. But this is a match made in heaven. Diablo 2 remake while flying on an airplane is such an enjoyable experience. You got that comfy, cozy Diablo 2 playstyle on a portable system while you're flying on an airport. Oh man, flying to Tokyo, 16-hour flight, and you got 16 hours of Diablo 2. That elevates the experience, the fact that it's on handheld. So handheld can, or medium can play a factor on the 10 out of 10s on the ranking scale. For instance, if the graphics of Tears of the Kingdom, right? Tears of the Kingdom. I use Tears of the Kingdom because it's newer than Breath of the Wild, despite them having the same graphics engine. But if that game came out on PC and looked like it did, those graphics are enough to give it a full downgrade. Art direction, still spectacular, but if it had that jaggy polygon stuff, it could give it a full downgrade. Because, PC games are on a platform that have better graphics. But Tears of the Kingdom is on a mobile platform, so those graphics are actually compatible with that platform. That might start to change with Steam Deck, but we'll see. What else do I gotta add to this? Trying to think of some other 10 out of 10 bangers that I think obviously, let's talk about Diablo 2 and PoE, since those are like my core game audience. Well, PoE is my core fan base here, even though I think everyone just hate watches me, which is excellent. PoE 2 and PoE and D2 are both 10 out of 10s. 10 out of 10s. They are the same genre, and I think Diablo 2 is still more popular than Path of Exile, especially with the D2R. I think more people are playing D2R than they are Path of Exile. This game has got staying power for days, and obviously PoE doesn't compare to Diablo 2 in terms of like its nostalgic presence and everything that it did for the genre. But what PoE did was created a replayability loop for this type of genre that is absolutely spectacular. And on top of that replayability loop, what Path of Exile did with its currency is great. Oh man. Keep undoing that color. And it's a little rough. Black. Paint it white. And no, I'm not going to change to a better tool than MS Paint, because MS Paint is where it's at. So you could just use gold, right? You could just use gold for everything. But that's kind of boring. You don't really get excited about getting a stack of gold. That just doesn't happen anymore. What Path of Exile did is they did like a 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 1 million. Deet, 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 deet. Each one of these is like a currency. So you got your town portal at 1. Then you got your, I can't remember what the blue thing is called. Then you got your blue currency here. Then you got like your alchemy. Then you got your chaos orb. And these values are kind of like the multiplier of each. Then you got your exalted orb. You got your divine orb. Then you got your exotic high-end currencies. And then you got your mirror. At first, when you first start the game, at least me, I'm excited about the 1s, the 2s, and the 4s, right? I get these, I'm like, hell yeah, these are exciting. But as you play the game, these become less exciting. And then now only these are exciting. Like, okay, it's got to be these, or I'm not excited. And you get something called a loot filter. It filters out the shit that you're not excited about anymore. You're like, oh, I'm not excited about that. I don't need to see it. I don't need to get it. And then eventually, your loot filter, you're just cutting out all of this. You're just like, whatever. I don't give a shit about any of this. I'm only looking for big boy drops. And then you get excited about those. And the way that every piece of currency is useful. Gold is useful to buy stuff. But the currency system in Path of Exile is such an elevation to the genre that the currency alone is almost enough to give Path of Exile a 10 out of 10. But you add the currency with replayable little maps here, where you can run the maps and you get used to the maps and you can like perfect your little maps. Let's say you're playing, that was me trying to draw a toll. Can you guys believe that? You're trying to play a toll and you're trying to perfect the atoll map, right? You got your boss room up here. You can go left and up, down, up, and then out. And you can do a bunch of stuff to like perfect the map. A lot of people very much enjoy running the same map over and over and over. Or you can run random maps. And all that is designed to pimp up your gear. And then the complexity allows that gear and that loot to build new and unique builds if you're into that kind of thing. That's what I like to do. I like to build the hipster builds. Obviously, I can just do the standard meta build, spend 100 divines, and then plow through it. But I like to experiment on the edges. And Path of Exile allowed you to experiment on the edges like no action RPG that has ever been made. Diablo 2 doesn't allow you to do it to the same level. Diablo 2 is far more simple than Path of Exile. So even though you have to compare Path of Exile to Diablo 2, it still is good enough to be a 10 out of 10. To go back to my original theory. That is like comparing Michael Jordan to Kobe. Kobe is a 10 out of 10. Michael Jordan is a 10 out of 10. Arguments for either of these, who is a better basketball player, it's just a matter of opinion at this point. Objectively, these two are both 10 out of 10s. The same with Path of Exile and Diablo 2. Bump, bump. I should have done guitarists or musicians because that's a lot more subjective. Let's take some guitarists like the Jimmies. Now, a lot of people are going to be like the Jimmies. Obviously, Hendrix is better, and a lot of people would be obviously Page is better, right? Both of them, you can argue, are 10 out of 10 guitar players simply because of their notoriety, their tone recognition, their writing, all that stuff. But then there's other guitar players that are just significantly better than the Jimmies, and Paul Gilbert. Let's just throw Paul Gilbert out there. Paul G, he's a 10 out of 10 as well. And the reason that this is a bit weird is because you never really know a guitarist's raw power and potential. You only know what they're giving out. There's a guitarist called John 5 who is in a band called Marilyn Manson. And if you just listen to Marilyn Manson, you're going to be like, oh, John 5, he's just an okay guitarist. He's not that great. But then John 5 released his own albums, and you realize he's a spectacular guitar player. But because Marilyn Manson is an industrial metal band that was primarily focused on the beat and the vocals, there was no real place for him to shine on his guitar work. I'm mostly just talking to play my thing here. All right, fine. I'm done playing with my new pin thing and making this video. Finn, I'll check you guys later. I don't know what I'll be doing in terms of content. Right now I'm playing Etron Odyssey 3. Still trying to beat that bad boy. But I'm not going to make any videos on it. That's a lame game that only I like. And it's boring. Diablo 4 is boring until Seasons. So I'll be back with more content for D4 on Seasons and PoE whenever that's out. Whenever the new season's out. I'll check you guys later. Enjoy. It's hard to get off of there.